welcome everybody to another episode of the Thought Leader Show. I am your co-host, Ryan Perry, with Stephen Jones. Stephen, we have a great guest today that I'm really excited to get to talk to and ask some deep questions.
I am as well. John, actually, we met through a group that I have here in Nashville, is how I met. But we have John Thalheimer with us today. And if you have an HR team, if your company deals with people, this will be really helpful for you. But John's the CEO of the team at HR Stories. He's actually an award-winning management consultant, sought-after workshop facilitator, and author. And he's helped hundreds of businesses and thousands of professionals transform their potential into extraordinary performance. How's that for an intro? John, thank you for being with us today. I want to roll into the first subject so I can get you going, because this is quick.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, John. We appreciate it. Let's talk about talent management. Give us that intersection between HR and managers. What does our audience need to know?
Yeah, I mean, when you think about it, right? So let's just kind of back up a little bit, because when I'm thinking about a company, right? And so I talk to a lot of entrepreneurs, startups, small business owners, and they have this great business idea, and that's great, but it's not going to get done until you have employees, right? I mean, we need employees, we need that talent, we need to move them on there. And there's this really interesting intersection between where human resources and employment law comes in terms of what us as managers and leaders are trying to do. And I've spent probably the last 2 or 3 years in that intersection, working with managers, working with HR, and trying to get them to see each other's perspective.
I feel like that would be tricky because you've got different personalities, different perspectives, different opinions, and things like that. Tell us a little bit about maybe how you work with that when you're working with teams of people with all different kinds of personalities and backgrounds and perspectives.
Yeah, and I mean, I think part of it is, as managers and executives, they have a very clear, this is what we want to do, this is what we want to accomplish, these are the objectives. At the same time, a human resources person, professional, will have their perspective that what needs to be done. And sometimes we hear managers go, oh, HR is getting in our way. They're not allowing us the freedom. They're talking about these things. HR is like, well, we need to do this because we need to be compliance in there, right? And a lot of times when we're having these HR manager conversations, I always remind the managers that HR isn't doing this because they want to, right? They're not sitting in their office going, okay, well, we need to make sure that everyone gets overtime because this is the right thing to do. They're doing it because it's law. And I think a lot of times we forget as managers and leaders that there is employment laws that we need to follow, and HR's responsibility is to make sure that we're compliant with those laws. And so that's where it starts, right? And then you have the different personalities and the different goals and different expectations on the top. And so first, if we understand that we're all working towards the same goal, right? And as long as that's well defined, like, hey, this is what we want to do, HR can come in and go, okay, this is the guidelines, these are the guide rails that you need to work in. And then managers will help you as long as you're working within those guidelines.
And I think it's interesting when you think about behavioral styles. Some people are more attracted going towards something, right? I want to go towards success. That's typically going to be your CEO, your entrepreneur. And I would imagine people that are really successful in HR are kind of the opposite. It's more about how can we stay away from pain and problems. And they're kind of looking at the same problem, I would imagine, in 2 different ways. And I think about, I don't know if you ever saw the Uber story. I think it was on Netflix, and just how over the top the management team was in early Uber days in San Francisco, the partying and all the things. And then, they got big enough that HR is like, hey, we've got PR issues. We've got all these other things. We really have to contain us. And you got a sense that the CEO of Uber, and I forget his name, was just feeling like he was being shackled and that
Okay.
he wasn't able to express himself in the ways that he wanted to, which happened to be very illegal, I would think.
Probably
Yeah,
so.
I haven't seen the movie, but I remember the story, and I remember, when he got in trouble and all that kind of stuff kind of played out. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs and small business owners, as we're going through that startup phase and that kind of stuff, we're kind of just running, right? We're just running, we're doing those things, and all of a sudden we're like, okay, we need to be paying attention to these employment laws because now we've reached 15 employees, right? And so certain laws kicked in when we reach 15 employees, when we reach 20, when we reach 50, new laws are coming in. And so I think there's a lot of that, like, oh yeah, I'm being restricted, but it's for our own protection. And I think one of the things that happened to me along my career is I was working with an employment lawyer. And what I loved about this employment lawyer was he's like, John, here's the risk to your organization. You're going to get to choose, but here's the risk. And when he put it that way, it allowed me to go, all right, well, the risk is small. I may take that chance. Or the risk is really high. I probably better not take that chance. And when the HR person, the HR consultant, the HR manager, director is telling us that, yeah, sure, we can make that decision to an extent, right? We don't want to do that, but it's our risk. If it's our business, it's our risk to make that choice. But I want you to be careful because we tell stories all the time about where companies get it wrong, and they're big payouts where companies get it wrong, right? And so you got to be paying attention to that for sure.
That's a lot of revenue to lose.
It can be.
When you're coaching these companies, do you find that they get the insight that they need from sources that that you can put them in front of, or do you give them the resources? Do you give them the insight? Like, how does that interaction work from your perspective, working with them, working with the client?
Yeah, and so we try, again, part of my goal is to give them the information, right? And so when we leave, we don't want them to be like, okay, I need to call John every 5 minutes, right? That's not my goal, is to have somebody call me 5 minutes. And my business partner and I, we created a book that is titled The Ultimate Book of HR Checklist. And the reason we did that was because a lot of times a small business owner is doing their job, right? They're really good about, okay, I know how to hire people, I know how to do this, but all of a sudden an investigation needs to happen. And they're like, I don't know how to do that. Right? I don't even have the first place to start, right? And so we put in our book a checklist. Okay, here's how you do it. FML question, here's how you do it. Hiring somebody's, here's how you do it. And it just gives them that guide. And I would rather be there for the big strategic, like, well, what should I do and how should I, versus how do I do this little one thing, right? So that's, to me, that's really important. So giving them that resource, Stephen, is really important, right? To kind of address that.
How do you break it down by company size? So if a company is, got 10 people, or a company has got, 100 people, like, is the guide kind of broken down that way also?
Well, what we do is one of our first checklists is the basic laws by the number of employees. And so when you're looking at it, like, so when there's one employee, you have to follow the FLS. OSHA, there's some OSHA regulations you have to follow, right? So, and then when you get up, like, as I said earlier, you get to 15, now Title VII kicks in, ADA kicks in, and so we need to be starting to pay attention to those. And then when we get to 20, COBRA kicks in, and then when we get to 50, the Affordable Care Act kicks in, right? And so there, again, when we hit 100, there's different laws. And so we really try to work with them to go, okay, here's where you are, where are you going? Because a lot of people, FMLA kicks in at 50. And a lot of employees will get to 45, employers will get to 45, and then we're like, okay, so are you going to go over 50 in the next year? All right, well, let's start talking about FMLA. Let's start implementing. Let's get those posters in place because you're no good at it. I've had organizations say, we're stopping at 47 because we don't want to have to deal with FMLA. And so
that's interesting, because I was thinking about, from a leadership point of view, how does that affect, individual business owners that you've worked with, that there is a certain amount of, you talk about risk reward. At some point, where does that risk reward just kind of balance out and you say, okay, I'm okay where I'm at?
Yeah, I mean, again, it has a lot to do with like numbers and profit margins and all that like stuff. And so you have to be starting to think really strategic there. I think it's to me, it's kind of silly to be like, well, we're going to stop at 47 employees. But if there's an opportunity for growth, you're going to do it, right? And so you just grow and you just keep growing. You just need to know, like, okay, I'm at 49. If I'm going to have consistently 52 people next year, I'm going to have to do FMLA. And this is when, I don't know, there's not an exact number like you need an HR person. But really, as your organization is growing, you definitely need to tap into an HR consultant, right? You need somebody there to tap in to have that HR consultancy. And then somewhere along the way, bringing somebody in-house so you have somebody that you can rely on, that studying employment laws, that know that and is paying attention, and putting the processes and procedures in place so you are following them is critical when we're in that role of a leader. I don't think we have enough bandwidth to do everything that we need to do. We're out marketing, we're out making sure our product's great. And then we have to then do the processes and stuff. That's when that HR person comes in and kind of smooths that out. And they can be a great ear to be like, yeah, you probably don't want to do cocktails at 4 every Friday afternoon for 3 hours with the team free, right? Because now you're opening yourself up to exposure.
The salary alone that you would pay that person would offset any costs that you might potentially get in fees and fines.
Yeah, we look at all the different numbers. Sometimes they're on 112,000. I was reading one the other day was $2.4 million. There's just so many out there. And every day I get 4 or 5 just from the Department of Labor, and then 4 or 5 from the EEOC, where they're finding these companies. And a lot of times we're like, oh, we're too small. We're too small. And I will tell you, the Department of Labor has really changed their tune on small businesses, and we'll go after them.
When you say small, can you kind of put a range on that? Is that by employees, by dollar amount?
So I was thinking in terms of employees. And so, I hear what we hear from small business owners is, oh, I only have 60 employees. They don't care about me. But if one of your employees goes to the Department of Labor and goes, hey, I don't think I'm being paid overtime right, they will come in and do that investigation. Sure, it may not be as a high priority as somebody that has 10,000 employees, but they will get to you and they will investigate. And so
one of the things I know I want to get to, because I know leaders are going to be interested in this as well, would be around developing coachability. So talk to us about how they can achieve better performance at work with their people in relation to developing coachability.
Yeah, and it's interesting, right? And so I spend a lot of time with coaching individuals, right? So coaching individuals that are moving up to leadership roles, ones that are in leadership roles. And it wasn't until recently we started thinking about, are individuals ready to be coached? And so you may think, oh, I'm going to be this person, but if you're not ready to be coached, do not hire a coach. It's just not going to work out. You're going to be like, oh, this doesn't do it, right? And we see this all the time. And so we've been really working on, we built a workshop around this concept of, can we teach people how to be coached? And a lot of us come from the education world or come from the sports world where we have a coach on the sideline that's helping us. But when we talk about developing coachability, it's about asking ourselves the question, and how do we take that external feedback and make internal changes? And so there's a lot of things that go into it, but it is a really important thing to be able to go, can I listen to what Ryan and Stephen are saying in their thought leadership program, and take that in and go, oh, I need to adjust, or I need to think differently, or I need to do something differently. I always tell people in my workshops, like, if you're going to come to my one of my workshops, I'm going to give you knowledge. But the next day, it's up to you to take some kind of action based on that knowledge. If you come to my one workshops and you're like, oh, this is great, and you don't do anything differently, then you've wasted your time. And so I think that's always for me when I'm going to workshops and listening to leaders and talking to my mentors. It's, what am I going to do differently based on what they're telling me? And so that kind of gets that whole developing coachability. There's a lot of different things we can break down, but that's the real start of it.
Do you have to teach that coachability to the leaders so that they can then teach that coachability to their people?
Yeah,
Is
well,
that kind of a
sometimes, I mean, and
pass through,
sometimes we'll
pass
go
down?
in and we'll teach managers how to coach, right? And I kind of like doing both of them. Like, I love going into an organization where I'm teaching managers how to coach. At the same time, I'm teaching the employees how to be coachable, because they really do go hand in hand. We try to get the managers to, when we're teaching them how to coach people and how to get them better and improve their performance and effectiveness in the workplace, how to build trust with their employees so they feel coachable and that kind of stuff. But it's also beneficial when we're teaching the employees, like, hey, you're going to get feedback in your workplace. Your job is to take that and go, okay, what do I need to do? What are your goals? And will this help me get to my goals? And then take that information and kind of bring it along. So very interesting kind of perspective there.
Just want to throw something out there real quick. There was something real interesting in your bio about the Gallup poll. The 70% of employees' engagement is directly related to managers' performance, and I would bet coachability would be in there as well. But I thought that was
I
pretty
mean, to me,
interesting.
that statistic, and Gallup came out with a book, and gosh, it's now about 5 or 6 years ago, called "It's the Manager." And it was fascinating to me because I remember I was flying across the country. I was coming back from a workshop and I was reading this book. And typically when I'm reading a business book, some new stuff, that kind of stuff, but I'm not really relating necessarily with it. But this book, man, I was writing my notes and I'm like, yes, I've been saying this for years.
You're highlighting, you're underlining.
I
You're
was
dog
underlining,
earing.
I was doing everything. I literally have, I mean, it's right there. You can kind of see it out of my eye. And one of the things they said is when we look at an employee's performance at work, the number one lever to engagement is their manager. And we know that. We all know that intuitively because we say things like, people don't leave a company, they leave a manager, right? But if companies are not teaching their managers, right? And managing is not something that we're born with, right? We have to develop, we have to get those skills and develop those skills. And a lot of times we will train our team members on this specific skill. You need to be able to really good at this particular machine or knowing how to say this words or whatever it is, but we don't take the time to do that with managers, right? We don't teach them, okay, this is a skill. This is a skill set that you have to learn to be good at your job so we can be productive, so we can produce what we need to produce.
Yeah, it reminds me of sorry, Stephen. It reminds me, and I forget who talked about this, but why managers fail. And the idea is that somebody who does learn a machine or whatever their position is when they're younger, they tend to move up because they performed well. And then as they continue to move up, they get moved into management roles, which has a completely different criteria of mindset, leadership, all the things, because there's so many more human aspects that are involved. And that the idea is that corporations fail, managers fail their employees simply because they've been promoted into the wrong position that they weren't properly trained for.
Yeah, 100%, Ryan, 100%. And I see it all the time, right? We have that subject matter expert that is so good at their job. We're like, oh, we need to promote them. Well, do they know how to communicate? Do they know how to listen to other people? Do they know how to inspire other individuals? Do they know how to help somebody get into a higher level of performance? Maybe not, because they've been dealing with that one task that they're really good at. They may not have it. And so we have to, when we're promoting individuals into the higher manager role, it may not be your subject matter experts. It may be something else. And
I saw that all the time in sales. I did a lot of sales growing up, and that happened all the time. It's like, you did really great at sales, so let's put you into management and leadership. Yeah, that doesn't make sense.
Yeah, and structurally, unfortunately, when we look at companies, a lot of the times the managers are the ones that are getting the salary, getting the bonuses, and getting that thing, which they deserve. But for me to move up or to keep in with the company, the only way I can do it, only way I'm going to be rewarded for that is to get into that manager tenure. And that may not be the best thing, right? And that may not be the best thing for me as an individual to be put in that manager role. And I've seen people that are put into that manager role and struggle and get exhausted and tired, and then they move back to their subject matter expert and then they excel again, right? And so again, knowing that and go, okay, who's the right person to put in that role becomes really important.
Everybody's got their certain seat on the bus.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right, yeah. Yeah. And no
Real
one's
quick,
born,
I
right?
know
We're kind of doing that.
Yeah, real quick, because I know we're running out of time here. I am curious within that leadership role, behavioral style training, is that something that you promote or incorporate into the training as kind of understanding that people do think and see the world differently and being able to identify those different behaviors so that you can communicate with them differently?
Yeah, and so I approach it. I approach it what I call the advantage point, right? And so every one of us has a different way that we look at the world, and that is based on our life's experience, our education, our DNA, the environment we grew up. All that kind of stuff rolls into our advantage point. When we understand our advantage point and start recognizing that our advantage point is different than everyone else around us, then we can start going, wait, they have a different advantage point. What can I use? What strengths do they have that I can capture? Right. Where can they be? Where can they support me? Where they can help me? And then can I be vulnerable on the other hand going, that's not for me. I'm not good at that. One of the best teams I worked on, everyone was so clear, like, that's not my expertise. I can do it. I can dabble into it, but it's not my expertise. So let's get somebody that is the expert. Let's get them in there and do that. It really does, Ryan, really opens up that change and that kind of stuff. And we get into where your behaviors come from, and we talk about your filters and your advantage point and then your emotional reaction and kind of bringing all that together so we can see like, oh, that's why people behave the way they do.
All right.
Yeah, that's good insight.
Yeah.
John, how can people find you? Website, socials?
Yeah, so there's two. The great website for me is the team at HR Stories. The team at hrstories.com. And if they want to reach out to me individually, that's john@johnthalheimer.com is the best way to get a hold of me. Just email me. I typically respond within 24 hours. So if you have any questions about management, leadership, talent management, that's the person there. And then we have tons of workshops on our team at HR Stories. So you can tap into that as well. So
awesome.
Yeah.
Hey, man, I really appreciate your time. This was really insightful. This was really helpful. Good. I think our audience really appreciate it as well.
Good.
If you found content like this beneficial, be sure to like and subscribe. We definitely want to thank John Thalheimer for his time and sharing his wonderful insights and experience. Until next week, take care.